begin with a scaled up drawing, and here I'm using a 3-value or 4-value photograph, posterized photograph that I made on Photoshop, but you can also use a Notanizer app to get the same effect, and that helps me simplify the drawing. Once the drawing was finished on tracing paper, I transferred it to my watercolor paper using graphite paper called Saril paper. You can also scribble graphite on the back of your tracing paper and transfer it that way. So now I'm ready to begin painting, and I'm using cadmium yellow as my first color. I'll be using primarily silver black velvet brushes that are squirrel with just a little synthetic in them. And I'm beginning with a number 10, using the cadmium yellow to paint the pistils in the center of the peony. So cadmium yellow is a color that loves to solo. It really shines when applied and left alone. So I wanted something strong and radiant for the middle of the flower. I'm not worried about the details. I'll do that later with some negative painting. Here I've dropped in a little permanent rose for a little shading, and it almost creates a fiery effect. Here I've created hard edges, the pistils against the tops of the petals in front of it. I put a little cerulean blue in the middle to create a greenish shade that I can see in the picture. Now I'm going to take some magenta and I'm going to go right into this hard-edged area and get a really deep, deep color. So I'm really going right from a bright, brilliant part of the painting into the shadowy depths of the flower. And this is a permanent magenta. So right in this one little area, I have the full range of value for the painting. So this will be my key for the rest of the painting. Now I'm going to start with this heart-shaped petal. And I look at the photo and I think about the colors I see, I think about the value, and I'm seeing just a hint of blue. So I'm dropping in some pink, got a little dark, made a little pinker. So I'm kind of going back and forth with this. And here, I had wet the petal before I applied the paint, and it's handy to tilt the paper to get it moving the way you want. And when you're going to have a darker shade behind the color, or next to the color rather, it's fine to go outside the lines, because later on you can paint over up to that edge. So we don't have to be careful about that. And when the value is the same from one petal to the next, even if the hue is different, it's good to let those areas flow together, and that really makes the flower look alive. So as I go forward, I'll be wetting each petal, and as just one by one, and I'll focus on where there's the most contrast and lay the tip of my brush with the strong color there, and let the color then fade towards the light and white edge of each petal. So I wanted a deep, rich background, and I started with a very liquid wash of sap green and dropped in a little yellow ochre, and I tried to keep everything wet. And here comes some burnt sienna. I wanted the background to look out of focus, at least in the beginning. Here's some mineral violet, a favorite color, and more back to the green. And now the paper's starting to dry, so I spritzed it with my atomizer, let things run this way and that, use gravity, and a little cobalt. So there's some cobalt on the flower petals, and I want to be sure to have some of the flower colors in the background to unify it. What's interesting is that the pigments I used for the flower itself are transparent staining colors, except for the cadmium, which is a heavier color. But the background colors are mostly non-staining colors that flow. And this is where I get good definition on the pistils. Little negative painting. So now it really pops with that beautiful permanent rose with a little magenta in the background. And this negative painting with the permanent rose really gives a sense of depth to the flower and really establishes the center of the flower as the focal point of the whole painting. The background has dried lighter than it appeared at first, and that always happens. So now it's time to get out my big guns, my dark colors, and do some negative paintings to create leaf shapes and stems and all kinds of interesting chaos. So this is the jadeite green, which is a Daniel Smith color, and I'm dropping some permanent magenta, which is a Winsor & Newton color, and then I also have a Holbein burnt sienna and a Winsor & Newton ultramarine blue. So I like to mix up my brands, and I'll eventually go back and put a glaze over this background because these hard edges are going to compete too much with the flower. So right now I'm just trying to find forms in the background. Now we get to work on the bee. We're kind of saving the best for last here. And so I'm going in with a mix of ultramarine blue, maybe a little burnt sienna to make a black. And see there, the bee is convinced that this is a real flower. And so thank you for watching the video.